So it's such a pleasure to be with you all. I live and work in Boston, but I'm originally from Columbus, Ohio. I grew up Unitarian Universalist, and it's a great pleasure to work for the UUA and with congregations and faith communities across the country, across the association, to have some very similar conversations to what we're going to talk about today, which is what's going on out there in the world that we live in when it comes to religious practice in America, and maybe a couple of things that we can do about it. So I want to start this morning with just a question. Is this working? Good. Excellent. This is my favorite part, is getting to use the clicker. So here's my question about being UU, right? Is that we don't have a theology that says if you don't come to church on Sunday or if you don't participate, you're going to hell. That's not who we are, right? But we keep coming back. Why do we keep coming back? We are, and I don't know if you've ever heard this phrase before. I got this from a book from back from the 70s, a religion of converts. Most of the people in our congregations did not grow up UU. Did not grow up UU. Show of hands, how many folks weren't born into Unitarian Universalism? Wow. Yep. So that's about par for the course. Since the 70s, about 90% of us have come from a different faith tradition. And that means that we came here by choice. We choose to be here. It's that important to us. So why do we do that? Why do we keep coming back? I think it's actually a pretty simple answer. And it's that Unitarian Universalism saves lives. I would say that Unitarian Universalism, that our faith, saves lives. I would say that Unitarian Universalism has saved my life more than once. Saved my life as a little kid, a quirky kid growing up in a small conservative southern town. Saved my life when I graduated from college and had no idea where I was going or what I was doing and was seeking for something to anchor me in that discernment and those decisions. Saved my life working as someone in the professional world who was trying to sort out difficult questions and find a community that could hold me through that anxiety and through that ambiguity. Unitarian Universalism has saved my life. That's why I keep coming back. That's why I work for the UA. Is there anybody else out there who would say that Unitarian Universalism has literally or figuratively saved your life? That's right. That's right. And that's a very precious thing. That's a very precious thing. So what I want to talk about today is what we would be willing to risk for this faith. What we would be willing to risk for that. If you raised your hand a second ago, or even if you didn't, I want you to just take a second and think to yourself about what that experience was like. Maybe you wouldn't go so far as to say that Unitarian Universalism has saved you, or maybe that's not the word that you would use, but think about a time when this faith has meant that much to you. And what was that occasion? What was going on in your life or in your world that being a part of this faith community made all that difference? Can you think of that? Hold on to it for just a minute. Because when we ask what that's worth, then we can ask what we might be willing to risk for it. Because someone had to risk something for us to have that experience to begin with. Someone else had to risk something in the past, in your community, a friend of yours, someone reached out, someone made something possible so that you could have that experience. So what are we willing to risk to make sure that more folks like us can have that experience? Have any of you heard someone say, I came to this church and I thought, where has it been all my life? Where has it been all my life? And that's a beautiful thing, and it also kind of breaks my heart. It's like, so we could have meant that much, and we hadn't, but they couldn't find us. They couldn't find us. So think about what that's worth to you, and think about what that could be worth to so many people. And that's the context for our little discussion today. Because the truth is that the world around us is changing, and it's changing pretty quickly. And so I want to talk about the change in terms of generations. You all probably have heard talk that shows up in the media all the time. Generations. These are the generations that tend to be present in our congregation. The World War II generation. Folks born about 1900 to 1925. Those were my grandparents. Are there any folks here who might be from that generation? Wonderful. That's beautiful. That was the generation that was present in the leadership of our churches in many ways when our two religions came together. The lucky few generation, this is often called the silent generation, but I gave one of these presentations and folks who were in the silent generation told me that they didn't like that term. So I did some research and found out that at the time they were also called the lucky few generation because they were sandwiched in between the World War II generation and the baby boom. So are there any lucky fewers? You lucky few, look at you. That's about 1925, 1944. I know we've got some baby boomers here. That's right. How about Generation X? Roughly 65 to 80, yep, definitely Gen Xers. And where are the millennials in the house? We all get applause. I'm a millennial too. And so there are changes that happen across generations, but I want to particularly talk about the millennial generation today because in the millennial generation, things are changing with the way that people interact with religion. They're really changing. Here's a statistic for you. 33%, so a third of the people in my generation say they have no religious affiliation. That's not, I don't go to church on Sunday or synagogue on Saturday. That's, do you have a faith community? Not really. 33%. It's 20% of American adults as a whole, across all ages, and that has doubled since the 1990s. This is happening really fast. Have you all heard this statistic before? Have you heard this? This is yes, this is no. This is a little bit of yes, some, okay. Not such a strange thing. The other thing that I want to point out about when we talk about millennials is that millennials is a way to enter this conversation, but really there's a universal design principle at work here that if we can think about what it would take to be a valuable place for millennials, those are actually changes that are going to benefit and be sought out by people across the age spectrum. So I just want to keep that in mind, that even though we're approaching this from a millennial place, that it's really about everybody. I want to show you just one graph about this to make this point crystal clear. This is from the Pew Forum, great polling group out there, and this is a graph of people who say they have no religious affiliation, and each one of these trend lines right here is a different generation. So this is the World War II generation. This is the silent generation, baby boomers, Xers, millennials. And this graph is actually a few years old, so the millennial dot there only says 26%. That was 2010, now it's 33. And the cool thing about this graph is that this dot, and that dot are all at the same points of life. So what you're seeing here is that even though, religious practice does tend to change a little bit over your lifetime, maybe when you have kids you come back, it's still a big difference between the generations. It's still a big difference. So we can't just look at this and say, well, young people maybe just don't want to go to church, not in their 20s, not in their teens, but they'll come back. I don't know. I mean, what do you think? And I'll just point out that every survey that's out there that has looked at these numbers is coming to the same conclusion. That's a little zoom in if you can't see it. So, okay, why is this happening? Why is this happening? We are good people. We do good things. We do good in the world. We know this. And yet these changes are going on around us. Well, there's a couple of theories. One is around clergy misconduct and mistrust in church hierarchies. And even though that has been concentrated in certain faith traditions more than others, everybody gets tagged with it. So that's one theory. Religious politicization, the rise of the religious right, the Christian coalition is another one, that they've sort of owned the term religion and taken it away from the rest of us. Another is changing life patterns, the things that would bring people back to church, weddings, baby dedications, and so on. Those things are changing in people's lives. People are getting married later, or maybe not at all, or they're having kids later, or not at all. And so you can't count on those things as like a hook to bring you back. And those are all good, but this is the one that I want to focus on today. And it's around not anything to do with our beliefs or our positions. It's all around institutions. So let me tell you why I want to focus on this. A couple years ago, there's a group out there called Barna. They surveyed young Christians, so not necessarily a lot of UUs, but they looked at young Christians who are leaving church, and they asked them, why are you doing this? Why are you leaving the church you grew up in? And they gave them 6 reasons. These are the first 5. Churches seem overprotective. Churches come across as antagonistic to science. Churches are judgmental related to sexuality. They're exclusive about theology and unfriendly to those in doubt. Well, I say, have I got a religion for you? Have I got it for you? Antagonistic towards science, right? I mean, are you kidding me? Judgmental related to sexuality. We, with our friends in the United Church of Christ, wrote the gold standard for sexuality education in the Our Whole Lives curriculum. The gold standard. We've been on the front lines of marriage equality and full inclusion in our society for queer people and people across the gender and sexuality spectrums for a long time. There's still work to do, but we've been there clearly on the front lines. We've made that a practice in our churches. Unfriendly to those in doubt, in our coming of age services, we say, you share in front of the entire congregation what you believe. I don't know anybody who does that. So if this is all that's going on, we should be sitting pretty, right? But it's not all that's going on. The 6th reason, and the way that they phrase it is that they experience Christianity is shallow, but what they mean is that the experience of church is shallow. And that's the one that we struggle with too sometimes. The rest of these, we're great. And that's why we haven't been losing members while our friends in mainline Protestant faith, say, are losing them just at incredible rates. I mean, the Presbyterian Church has lost like 28% of its members in the last 10 years. It's serious. And we're treading water against that current for these reasons, but we're staying where we are. We're held back by this one. So this is leading to some changing norms in our society about religion. And I have to tell you that I was making this point about the Barna study for a couple of months. And this is our big picture here, right? And I was making this point about the Barna study for a couple of months. And last month, Pew comes out with this study. This is their headline: Millennials in Adulthood, Detached from Institutions, Networked with Friends. And I was like, well, all right. And so what we're getting at here is that it is about connection. It is about community. It's just not in the way that we've been doing it. It's not in the way that we've been doing it. So, to be a little, if you want to go a little bit deeper, I'd recommend this book, American Grace: How Religion Divides and Unites Us, by the social scientist Robert Putnam, who's the guy who wrote Bowling Alone. Andrea has this book down in the bookshop if you're interested in picking it up. It's a doorstopper, so just read the first and last sentence of every paragraph. All right, so let's get specific. What's going on here, right? So this is a little cheeky, but I put together. So this is a graph of lots of Christian faiths, and here's Unitarian Universalism, decidedly different, over here in the corner. But we are similar in practice, right? Unitarians and Universalists used to be liberal Christians, and so our structures reflect that. The way that we put together our services tends to reflect that. That's not an accident. 75% of the people in our congregations grew up Christian. So what we've been able to do over the last 50 years is that the folks who grew up Christian are like, this place is not welcoming to me because of my identity or because what I think about the existence of God or the nature of the universe. This place that I grew up in, that's not speaking to me. I'm not welcome here, but I can be welcome at this Unitarian Universalist church. Is there anybody who finds himself, who is in that boat? Is there anybody who said that? that's been our bread and butter. Those are the people who have come to our churches for a long time. And that's why we're a religion of converts. But the truth is that the world, are you ready for it? What happens when our world gets turned upside down? Does anybody remember this ad in Time magazine? Is God keeping you from going to church? When this ad came out, I was so proud. I cut it out of the magazine and put it in my file, and it's still sitting in a file cabinet in my apartment. And it says, is God keeping you from church? And the problem is that God is not what's keeping my peers from church. Church is keeping them from church. Same thing with our bumper sticker here, the uncommon denomination, right? It only works if you're just trying to talk just about denominations. So here's another way to say this, right? The Sunday morning decision. You wake up, and 50 years ago in America, the question was, which church do I go to? Is it the one down the street? Is it the Methodist church? Or maybe it's that little UU one. I'll have to check that out. And I should say, this is not the same in every part of the country. So if you move to Charleston, South Carolina, you might have a different experience with this than as we do up in Boston. But by and large, that's the question that it used to be, and this is the question today. We're not just in the church business, we got to be in the meaning business, and we're in competition with going on a walk, reading a book, soccer practice, right? Brunch. If someone can figure out how to do church brunch, you're going to be a rich person. You're going to be a rich person because the brunch industry is booming out there, people. So this is our question. So, okay. So that's a lot of information, and I want you to just find a buddy sitting next to you for a minute or two, and just have a little exchange with them. Is this what you're seeing? Does this make sense given the congregations or the faith communities that you know? So just take a couple minutes and chat with someone next to you and ask this question of each other. Does this match what I'm seeing? Is this what I'm seeing in my community? Amen to that. Amen to that. We got to get better at that. We got to get better at that. And church is this loaded word, but that's what we are. And what do we do about that? So Phil, I think, mentioned the fact that the fact that people don't want to go to church doesn't actually say anything about what they believe. This is a graph that shows of these folks who identify as non-religious. This is all adults. These are the folks who say they're atheists down here. This is the agnostics down here, and this is the folks who are nothing in particular. A lot of them believe in God. They may even pray or read the Bible or other sacred texts. So that means to me that there's a real hunger out there for spiritual engagement if we can figure out how to feed it. If we can figure out how to feed it. So let's talk about these non-religious folks out there. Maybe they're in here, but out there, the groups. Sometimes I don't know if you've ever heard them called the nuns. This is a confusing term for them. This is a confusing term for them because our WHERE lecturer this year is going to be Sister Simone from Nuns on the Bus, but that's a different nun. That's a different nun, so we're going to have to figure that out. Anyways, this is actually a bigger and more diverse group than you may think. And there are two kind of streams within that going on. So let me tell you about those. The first have been termed the stable nuns. These are folks who really aren't seeking a congregational experience. They're not out looking for a church. They tend to skew younger, whiter, and sometimes more Asian, particularly on the Pacific coast, tend to be more educated, tend to be a little bit higher income. This is where you'll find the bulk of folks who identify as atheists and agnostics, humanists also. And so that's one group over there. The second group has been called the liminal nuns, and this is maybe not what you would think of when you think of people who are non-religious, but part of their thing is that actually their religious affiliation is in flux. It's in flux, and they've become a little bit interesting because when you ask them, so all these numbers come from surveys, and somebody says, do you have a religious affiliation? You say yes or no, or here's what it is. And these folks may tell you one thing this year, and then they'll tell you something else next year. And they often have some other kind of connection to a congregation. They've got a family member. Maybe they used to be in a church and then they moved, and there's not really a church that they like there. They're pretty diverse across age, race, income, background, educational level. And this is a lot of the folks, I don't know if you've heard this number, that there are like 3 times as many people out there who say that they're UU as our kind of core members of our congregation. I think a lot of them fall into this category, right? So we know these people. We know these people who are, their kid really is getting a lot out of the, the Neighboring Faith program, but they don't really, I guess they kind of come, and maybe they'll come on Easter or something, but they don't really come. They're not really members of the church, right? So this is a huge group, and it's even bigger than the surveys would have us believe, because you can't nail them down because they're telling you different things every time. So this is actually a really big group out here. So that's just a little bit of detail, because I think what we need is different kinds of strategies around these different sets of experiences. So let me talk about the liminal nuns first. And this is going to be, this is pretty familiar stuff for us. This is the stuff that we talk about a lot, and I just want to underline its importance. These are focusing on high-quality spiritual experiences or meaning-making experiences in our faith communities, in our congregations, dynamic, mission-driven organizations, streamlined leadership so we don't get caught up in process, the public witness, the justice work. That's a big part of who we are, making sure that folks know us for that in the community. Multi-generational, multicultural communities. Church is one of the few places in American society where people really make friends across generations. That's one of the precious things that we offer, and so holding that up and doubling down on that, and it can't just be one way to participate. There's got to be lots of ways. So this is probably what you think of when you think of how do we get better at what we're doing. I saw this. I had this meme. This is Morpheus from The Matrix, and he says, "What if I told you there doesn't need to be a different committee for everything?" Just think about it. Okay. And you say, "Carey, I know this, and we're working really hard on that right now, and I don't know, it kind of seems like a long road." Well, I'm here to give you some faith and inspiration, and to tell you that there are lots of congregations who are succeeding in this right now. Let me tell you about 3. One is in New London, Connecticut, All Souls New London. All Souls New London outgrew their small Romanesque-looking building or Gothic-looking building, and they were thinking about doing an addition, but instead what they did is they bought the used car dealership across the street and turned it into this beautiful sanctuary, and they turned their old church building into a day shelter for homeless folks in the community, working with interfaith partners across the city. That's All Souls New London. They get what's going on. And this is so much more accessible. They don't have stairs to get in, so that's great for the folks with mobility challenges. So it's light-filled, it's beautiful. That's All Souls New London. The UU Church of Ogden, Utah, smaller congregation. The UU Church of Ogden, Utah does multi-generational, intergenerational worship every Sunday. They just call it worship. And they're this wonderful little congregation. I even read this, I came across this blog post from some guy who was blogging, I'm going to go to 52 congregations, one church a week, and like critiquing them all. And he went to this church in Ogden and was like over the moon about it. And it was just so heartwarming to read that someone can kind of walk in and just have that experience. Here's the other thing that the church in Ogden did, is they started something called an outreach resource center, which is part of a network of resource centers for queer youth in the community, in a very conservative community in Utah. Talk about saving lives. Ogden is out there doing this by supporting this outreach center in their building. So that's Ogden. Who else do we have? Albuquerque, New Mexico. Albuquerque, New Mexico. It's a lovely congregation who also had a growth problem. Some people might call it a solution. And so what did they do? So they added another service on Sunday, and then they added another one, and then they added a music-based one, and they were still doing so well that they added branch campuses. They have now 3 different campuses, like 50 miles away from Albuquerque, and they live stream the ministers. This is the Reverend Christine Robinson here being live streamed into their worship, and they've got like leaders in those communities who work with them and who work with kind of the central parent church. So it's one church, but it's in like 4 different locations. So that's Albuquerque. They're doing some really cool stuff. There's lots of congregations that are experiencing, some people call that multi-site. I don't know if you've ever heard that term, but there's some congregations that are experimenting with stuff like this right now. So all of these 3 that I just told you about are all breakthrough congregations of the UUA. Does anybody recognize that term, breakthrough congregations, right? So breakthrough congregations are ones who have achieved some really spectacular things. This is the full list, which I know you can't read from where you're sitting, but the point is that there are a lot of them. The point is that there are a lot of them, and there's more every year, and they all have stories, and you can read about all of their stories and the cool things that they've done on uua.org if you search for breakthrough congregations. So let's give a hand for our breakthrough congregations out there. If you want to know how it can be done, you can ask them. Let's go back, though, to that other group, the stable nuns, and my response to this is that we have to be willing to try some new things, some new ways of being in faith community. Just a couple of points here. We have to help people who are themselves trying new things. We have to be supportive of that. We've got to take advantage of technology. We've got to really pay attention to that time commitment issue and go for time-limited things, not like if you're not here every single week that you're failing at this. We've got to be willing to fail and learn from that and move on. We've got to be intentional about who we're reaching out to, and it's okay to say that we come from the UU faith tradition, but we're open to people of lots of other faiths, because that's who we're trying to be. We're really trying to be open to people from all kinds of belief systems and backgrounds. I have a couple other examples that I'm just going to breeze through. The SALT program, which stands for Spiritual Activist Leadership Training, is a program of the UU Justice Ministry of California, and it's a series of weekend trainings often focused on typically younger adults who are interested in justice work, and they have discussions and retreats and trips, and they have speakers, and it's like a year-long thing, and it's being duplicated right now in Boston by UU Mass Action, so they're working on that. Here's another one. I just came across this one last week. This is a camp at Rowe Conference Center, one of our conference centers up in Western Mass. And it's called Skill Set, a new retreat for emerging adults, which is like young adults, like the 18 to 25 kind of set. And it's pretty much what it says. I read through their website. I had known that Rowe, I had some conversations with Rowe about what they were looking to do, but this is a fabulous example of them trying new things. I don't know whether it's going to work or not, but they're going for that this summer. It doesn't just have to be young adults. Generational changes affect all of us. The Glacier Circle Senior Co-Housing Co-op in Davis, California was formed by a couple of UUs who met in church and said, we don't want to grow old alone. And they opened this to anyone, even though it's primarily rooted in this sense of UU community. And so it's a senior housing cooperative in Davis, California that I learned about when I was out there a couple weeks ago. Let me give you an example from outside Unitarian Universalism completely, if you really want to bend your mind. This is a group in Britain called the School of Life, and I think what they're trying to do is very church-like in its way. They have a location, they have classes, and they're a publishing company. They publish books. They also do personal one-on-one like therapy. They sell candles, and one of the candles here is Thoreau. And I'm like, what are you doing with our candle? Right, but so they're pulling from, so the School of Life, right, so this is a little bit further afield, but what I want to say is that I think we're playing in the same pool as folks who are doing stuff like this. We're playing in the same pool. So that's just to give you kind of a sense of what is possible out there. I would be remiss in my duty before you as the Director of Youth and Young Adult Ministries for the UUA if I didn't hold this point up, that I think we do so much wonderful work in youth ministry, and where we drop the ball is in the transition between youth and adulthood. And that's a two-part problem. One is all the stuff that we're talking about here today, about making faith communities that people want to be a part of. And there's also attention to that specific transition and the challenges and the opportunities that are there right at that time. I just want you to know we are not the only people who struggle with this. I think this is in many part endemic to the model of congregational life and churches that we have. Our siblings in Protestant faiths and Reformed Judaism struggle with this as well. So paying attention to that bridging transition, I have to point that out. We can't just count on someday they'll come back with their kids, which is what I sometimes hear. We just looked at a whole bunch of numbers that said, I wouldn't bank on that. I wouldn't bank on that. There's an exciting program called Faith Architects that I've been working with to help get off the ground, which is a series of conferences specifically for adults who are trying to figure out where's my place in Unitarian Universalism as an adult. How can I find the pathways to leadership, to community, to connection, to meaning, to activism through my faith? So just stuff on the horizon. I don't know that we've figured this one out either. We certainly haven't. I just want you to know that there are a couple of good things going on right now. So we typically think, and the way that I've kind of set you up here is that here's the stuff going on in the congregations, and here's the stuff going on outside of congregations, and this is the congregations, and this is the beyond. Right? If you've ever heard of Congregations and Beyond, which is a paper that our president authored. But I think that there's a third way through that, which is that congregations themselves are absolutely capable of trying all kinds of new things. And I, from where I sit, congregations themselves are actually ideal places to try as many crazy new ideas as you can possibly handle. And let me tell you why. Congregations have a lot at their disposal. They have legal standing and documentation. Have you ever tried to start something like in the community and you're like, oh crap, now I need to file a 501c3 application with the IRS. That is a huge pain. That takes months. But congregations have all of that standing already. You have relationships in the community. You have legitimacy. You have those deep ties. You have a measure of financial stability and income. You have committed volunteers, passionate leaders, talented, well-trained staff. All of these are things that you have at your disposal. And as we pointed out in our discussion with ministers and religious educators yesterday, there are no UU bishops out there telling you what you can and can't do. Believe me, there are no UU bishops out there. I just don't think it would work. You know what I'm saying? And the truth, too, is that we don't have to look far and wide for inspiration. I think we have it in our hearts, and I think we already have it in the young folks who are here, who, if you want to know what millennials want to do, then ask a millennial. We're all over the place, right? So that is that's the one thing that I want you to hear that's between those lines. That is, this doesn't have to be someone else. We don't all have to be fantastic, but we can all try some new approaches, recognizing that what's gotten us here is not what's going to carry us forward. So Andrea's telling me, I had all kinds of great examples for how this is going to happen. But since we're a little behind, I will make this presentation available to you all. There's wonderful ways in which this engages all the people who are at the margins of our community. It's really great. I'm going to skip it. And I want to just close with a quick parable, since we're at the balance of our time. 100 years ago, a man goes to see the wise woman, and I like to think that the wise woman in this story is the Dowager Countess of Grantham. If you watch Downton Abbey. It goes to see the wise woman and says, I want to change the world. And the wise woman says, well, if that's what you want to do, then you must command the loyalties of men. You must, because of course it was men. You have to build impressive structures and buildings. You have to have constitutions and bylaws and officers and roles and titles to show people that you're serious, that you can follow through. And then with that kind of respect, you can go out and change the world. Today, 100 years later, a man goes to see the wise woman who I like to think is Michelle Obama, and says, I want to change the world. How do I do that? And the wise woman says, all you need is legions of passionate volunteers united around a cause. You need 1,000 points of light, say maybe congregations, spread across the country. You need people who can speak from the heart, from the soles of their feet about what they care about and the world that they're trying to build together. You need to get your people organized and get them fired up and ready to go. So we may have inherited the structures of the past, but I firmly believe that we have already all the things that we need to live into the future that we dream about together and change the world in small ways and large each day that we remain committed to our faith. So, it's not the first time, it won't be the last that we've encountered generational change, but we are a bold people, so go forth in faith.